So today we are diving into colour, and if you ever worked on colours on your website, you've probably seen RGB numbers or hex codes, and they're precise, but they're not exactly human friendly. If you've worked in print, you may have seen CMYK. So with most of them, they look a little bit like gibberish, and you can't tell at a glance if it's a purple or a teal or a burnt orange. And if you want something a little bit lighter or darker, it's basically trial and error to try and find that shade or tint that you're really wanting. And that's where HSL comes in. So let me just show you. So this actually are the color codes for this color. It's like a bright red. Some of you may have recognized that's a really familiar hex value. So sometimes you're able to work it out if you're familiar with some of the hex codes. So 6 Fs, for example, is white. 6 zeros, for example, is black, and then sometimes you can figure out what's in between, but only if you work with these a lot, and sometimes you just end up with a string of numbers and letters and they just are meaningless. So HSL, it stands for hue, saturation, and lightness, and it's a way of describing colours that actually make sense to our brain. So we're using those 3 separate values. So the hue is the actual colour itself, like red, green, or blue. Saturation is how vivid or how muted the colour is, and lightness is how bright or dark the colour is. And then when we combine these 3 values, we can describe any colour in a way that's accurate and easy to adjust. So let's start with hue. And this is really the type of colour, and it's measured as an angle on a colour wheel from 0 to 360. So 0 degrees is red, 120 degrees is green, blue is around about 240, and then everything in between are the transitional colours. And then this is the fun part. So if you add 180 degrees to whatever your chosen hue is, you get the complementary colour because it's the opposite one on the colour wheel. So if you were to choose green, for example, and then you were to add 180 degrees, it's going to take you to the exact opposite on the colour wheel, and it's going to naturally be a complementary colour. And if you're wanting a set of 3, you could take your hue, you can add 120 for the second colour, 120 for the third colour, and so on. So really, you can start creating colour harmony built right through the numbers itself. So when we're looking at hues, an easy way for me to remember it, and it's really unscientific, it's probably very, very incorrect, but the way that I remember it is, do you remember the acronym that you used to use for remembering the colours of the rainbow when you were a kid at school? And it was Richard of York gave battle in vain. That's how I remember the vague order of the colours on the colour wheel, because it's Richard of York gave battle in vain. Magenta would be the violet. Cyan doesn't exist in a rainbow, so it doesn't exist there, but it's easy enough to remember that opposite red, we've got cyan, which is this kind of turquoisey colour. So that is your hues. Then next is saturation, and this is really how intense the colour is, and it's recorded as a percentage. So 100% is pure colour with no grey, so we're up at this end of the spectrum. And then 0% is completely grey. And here's a quick tip, because the purest version of any colour at a specific hue, remember that hue is the colour on your colour wheel, is 100% saturation up here, and then 50% lightness. I'm going to show you lightness now. So lightness is the brightness of the colour from 0%, which is black, to 100%. Again, it's in a percentage. So we've got 0%, which is black, and then 100%, which is white, and then 50% is the pure normal version of your colour. So if you want a shade, you would lower the lightness. If you want a tint, you would raise it. And it's a really fast way to make consistent variations without changing the hue. And we also have colour pickers and sliders that can make this really, really useful for us. So this is an HSL slider. So if we know that we are wanting green, we can grab the degree number from here, and then we can play around with the saturation. So as we pull this saturation down, you can see it it becomes more and more grey until all the way at the end it becomes totally grey. If we take it all the way to the top, that's your 100% saturation, and then we can make it lighter on this scale. So here, if we take it all the way to the right, it's going to be white, all the way to the left and it's black. So usually you would be at 50% if you're wanting that true colour. So, or the brightest version of that colour, of the hue that you chose. So that's how these kind of spectrums can work. And it takes a little bit of time to get your head around it. If you're used to just accepting hex values, this colour picker also gives you the hex value of this colour. But as you can see, it's just a string of numbers and letters. Whereas here we've chosen a green from the colour wheel, and then we've given it 100% saturation, 50% lightness, and we know exactly what we're getting. So if we wanted a shade, we would lower this down on the lightness slider. If we wanted a tint, we would raise it so that we get more white in the colour. So why does all of this matter for your website if you're choosing colours? Now, if you are using Divi, you ultimately will be migrating to Divi 5 when it's released in a few months' time. HSL is the format that you're going to see in the colour pickers. And if you know how it works, you can keep your brand colours consistent by locking in the hue and then only adjusting the saturation and lightness. It means you can create lighter or darker versions of the same colour instantly for backgrounds, buttons, hover effects. And it means that you can build harmonious palettes by shifting the hue by exact degree values. It means you're not guessing anymore. Now, hopefully you would have set out a colour and font plan before you actually got building. But in case you didn't, Divi 5 is going to make it really easy with the HSL colour integration. Because if you compare that process to the likes of RGB or Hex, in RGB you would be making a colour darker by fiddling with 3 different numbers and hoping you get the balance right. So if we go to RGB, for example, this is the colour in RGB. If we wanted it darker, we don't really know whether we should be playing with the red, the green or the blue spectrums. So it becomes much harder for us to understand. It feels like a little bit of a gamble as to what we're doing, and it's much harder for us to do it accurately and get the outcome that we were eventually hoping for. And in Hex, you're just decoding a string of letters and numbers that you've really got no clue about the actual colour. And yes, it's so much easier because we have Hex to RGB conversions, and we have so many tools available to us. But nevertheless, if you want to be really accurate about the colours that you're getting and you want to lock in your hue and just play around with the actual tints and shades, HSL gives us far more control over that, because you see the relationship between the numbers and the colours, and you can predict exactly what a change will do. And it's really a game changer for building cohesive and professional sites. So, as you probably already know, the colours that you choose for your website are going to work best when you've got your primary colour palette. This is the ones that represent your brand. Then you've got the accent colours. Those are the ones for your highlights, calls to action, any kind of special elements on your site that you're using sparingly. And then you've also got foundational colours, which are often your greys or your neutrals, which you'd be using for backgrounds or text or subtle separators. And HSL makes creating and adjusting all of those so much easier for you whilst keeping everything consistent. So next time you're picking colours, whether it's your brand palette or whether it's a background, I would love for you to start thinking in HSL, because it's logical, it's predictable, it's a colour format that your brain will actually enjoy working with. And it really makes it possible to say something like, I want a slightly darker, more muted version of this colour, and you'd get it right first time because you can mute it with this, and you can make it darker with this, and then all of a sudden it's really predictable what you're getting. And I think once you start using it, you'll never want to go back to guessing in Hex or RGB again. So I'd love to know in the comments, are you familiar already with HSL? And if you're not, there's no shame in that, because definitely Hex and RGB are the ones that have been really mainstream up until now. And so there's absolutely no shade if you haven't heard about this, but I would love to know how you feel about it, whether you think that it looks like an easier system for you to be working with. That's it from now. Thank you so much for being here and joining me for Website Wednesday. Have a great day.